Hey guys, David here. So this review is a little bit late because I got sick and I was just very incapable of not only playing the game but also doing the review for it, so I apologize. Since that is the case, I'm just going to cut straight to the chase and make this for a very quick review. So, Dishonored Death of the Outsider was something that was announced at this year's E3, and it was actually one of my more exciting announcements. One of the announcements that I was more excited for because they were making not only an expansion to Dishonored 2, but they were going to let me play as Billie Lurke, somebody that I was actually thinking was going to be a very good protagonist for a third Dishonored game. And then little by little through conferences, the makers behind the game, particularly Harvey Smith, the creative director, started to say that Death of the Outsider was actually going to be the definitive end to what he called the Kaldwin era. Basically anything that has to do with the Empress, Emily Kaldwin, Corvo, the Outsider, and Dowd, and everybody that was involved in that assassination from the very beginning is going to have their storylines all wrapped up in a nice little bow with this expansion. So that's when things got really heavy when it comes to the circumstances and the responsibilities this game had to really deliver. For those of you who have been watching my videos for some time, you know that I love Dishonored. It's one of my favorite franchises, brand new IPs to be released within the past couple of years that made me go, wow, you don't actually have to be stealthy. I mean, it's an option, but you could go ahead and just go in guns blazing or knives wielding and still kind of get the job done. You'll just have to settle with the consequences. Cool, I love stuff like that, and I know that Dishonored is not necessarily the franchise that pioneered that, but it's one that took the elements of Assassin's Creed, the first person perspective, and be able to meld all these things together while at the same time being able to generate an original story and an original universe that has to do with magic and this made-up place of Dunwall, along with a brand new location in Dishonored 2 with Karnaca, and actually develop a world that I will love to know more about. In fact, I was at Barnes & Noble recently and there was this book that had to do with the timeline of the Kaldwin era from the assassination of the Empress and even further back to the creation of the Outsider and everything else in between. What does the terminology mean, the geography with where is the best place to find whale oil and stuff like that, and I genuinely wanted to buy the book. I just want to save up some money, but in the meantime, I wanted to dive more into this universe. Here's the deal though, knowing that it was retailing at $30, I knew that Death of the Outsider was not going to be as expansive as an original actual Dishonored game is, like the first one and the second one, so I wasn't going to be diving into the universe as much as I was hoping for, and that's practically what happened, because in the story for Dishonored Death of the Outsider, you take control of Billie Lurke, who's a character who has been there from the very beginning and got finally introduced properly in one of the other pieces of DLC for the first game, Knife of Dunwall. And this story not only brings her whole arc full circle, but also the one of Dowds, who's the main assassin, who kind of kicked things off from the very beginning in the first Dishonored. And they take on the task of assassinating a certain someone who has been prevalent in the entire series, and they kind of hold responsible for being the one to create this entire mess, only because he meddled in the business that he shouldn't have been meddling in, and that's the Outsider. They are taking the fight to the supernatural black-eyed being known as the Outsider. The game has about 5 missions and it took me about 8 hours to beat, but that's primarily because I want to kind of explore and to kind of play with my options, because that's what I've always loved about Dishonored, is that there's no straightforward way to assassinate or eliminate your target. You don't even have to kill him. You could just put him to sleep or dispose of him or something like that, and I've always been a stickler for trying to figure out different ways to take down my target and to get the job done. And so that core element of the game and of the series is still carried over to Dishonored. So at the beginning, I was given the impression that it's much more Dishonored. You get the same kind of gameplay elements, and you still get thrust into the world and into the story of Karnaca and Billie Lurke's story the way that Dishonored has always done. But the one thing that I knew from the get-go was that I wasn't going to be as involved into the universe as I was with the other games, because in the other games you could sit longer with it. Here, it took me 8 hours to beat the game, and 8 hours sounds like a long time for just a standalone piece of story like this, but compared to Dishonored 1 and 2, 8 hours is not going to be enough to really sit with the universe and sit with these brand new environments and get to know an awful lot of these characters. It's rather a briskly paced game where you're just going to be going in and out trying to retrieve your things, and the main focus of the story is it's not going to be so much the universe, but it's much more going to be Billie Lurke, the one character that you only got a glimpse of in the previous games, whether it be in the DLC for the first game or even in Dishonored 2 when she went under a different name. Here, you get to hear her voice more. You get to hear her perspective much more. You've got a good sense of doubt, especially from the DLC of the first Dishonored game, Knife of Don't Want Break More Witches. And here, you get to hear more about him, and you get to interact with them a little bit more. And everyone's still doing a spectacular job with the voice acting, which is why it worked so effectively, from Rosario Dawson as Billie Lurke to Michael Madsen returning as Dowd, and even as Robin Lord Taylor, aka the Penguin from Gotham. He comes back as the Outsider from Dishonored 2. And they all do an exceptional job at telling their story, one that feels earned and one that feels unique and proper for Billie Lurke. This is not a type of mission or a type of assassination to be taken from Corvo or Emily. This feels right for Billie. And ever so often, it can get a little trite to hear them talk in a way that's kind of whiny. You know, ever so often it can be like, you know, he'll pay for what he did to me. All I've known all my life is killing and blood and stuff like that. And ever so often they can get just a tad bit repetitive with it, but because these are characters that we've had from the legitimately from the very beginning, especially Dowd, who was given the task to assassinate the Empress from the very beginning that kickstarted the entire series, it feels slightly earned, so I can give them a pass for that. But if there was one thing that I couldn't overlook, is that it's something that's not so much found in this piece of DLC minus the binary ending. It would be that the continuity of how this connects to the previous stories that we've been told, from the main Dishonored games to the DLC expansions of Knife of Dunwall and Bring More Witches and all that, is a little finicky. Let's just say that some characters involved here actually died, like legitimately died back in like Knife of Dunwall or whatever, and yet here they're inexplicably brought back and there's no mention of what decision took part. And of course the saves can't carry over 100% because I played those DLCs on the PS3 for the first game, so they're not going to be able to really, unless they were to connect through my PSN account. But at the same time, they just threw that out the window because that decision that I made doesn't really matter. Characters are still alive here. That never really happened. So I wish that maybe Arkane Studios, if they are going to continue the series with different characters, different stories and whatnot, they're able to kind of balance out the continuity a little bit better. Because I'm telling you, some of these characters, I made the decision to kill them off, and yet they're back again. What gives? Now, I said that the gameplay started off as being much more Dishonored, and it really was. You're given the weapons, you're given the options of approaching things in a stealth manner or go in violently and try to take down things, but of course it's going to lead to a different form of ending sort of thing. But ultimately, it does play in a different form than the other games because you are controlling a different character, and that's something that I really appreciated about the gameplay that I started to figure out as it went on. Now, when it comes to the arsenal that you're given or the way that you're able to use up your health and stuff like that, it's pretty much the same. What's different, however, are the powers and the way that you kind of interact with the powers and interact with the void. That changes things up this time around, especially when it comes to someone like Billie, who was kind of reluctant at first with the powers, but with circumstances kind of unfold at the beginning of the story, you're given these powers that are a little bit switched up than they were before with Emily or with Corvo. One significant difference is that you don't actually run out of the magic to be able to use these powers. You just have to wait for it to replenish, as opposed to the other games where you would just completely run out. You will have to constantly look for those blue vials to be able to rejuvenate your magic, just like with the health. Here, you can actually just wait in the corner and it'll come back to you easy peasy. However, the catch is that you cannot upgrade your powers, and you're only given 3. And these 3 are variations of powers that you've had before, only with a slight little twist. Like, for example, you got the basic teleport power. This time, however, it's called displacement. And it has the overall similar functionality, only this time you can kind of put like a phantom version of yourself somewhere up there and still be able to roam around, so that then you can click the button a second time, and that will allow you to teleport to the place that you put your little ghost thingamajig form, whatever, there. One is the X-ray form that you've got before, that you can kind of see through walls, you can see enemies and pick up stuff. Only this time, you only get a limited amount of time to be able to use it. But you can actually kind of have like a second body experience, out-of-body experience, and just jump right out and actually radar and navigate the area around you to scope out where your enemies are. And I actually thought that this was an improvement on this version of the power from previous games, and I thought that was rather cool. And then there was actually a brand new power that you never saw before, which is called Impersonate, which is basically just that. You can impersonate other people's identities and kind of sneak on by. The only downside, however, is that it just mimics other people's appearance. If you do something fishy, you're going to get caught. And being able to use these powers in a different form and being able to just stick with these versions of the powers and not being able to upgrade them, but still be able to utilize them to my will because of how I'm just able to regenerate the mana, it was a brand new strategy that made me think differently with Billie than I thought of when I was playing as Emily in the second game or as with Corvo in the first game. So I thought that was actually rather unique and cool for the makers of Dishonored to be able to do that with this expansion. Though I did find it kind of peculiar that the enemies aren't so much different this time around. It's mostly about how they changed Billie Lurke up as opposed to changing the patterns of the enemies or the enemy types overall, because most of the people that you fight in this game are pretty much folks that you fought in the previous games. You got cultists and security guards and just the routine enemy characters that you got from Dishonored, with the exception of one towards the end. Without spoiling it, let's just say it's going to piss you off. And since you cannot upgrade your powers, there aren't any runes to really find in the world, but there's still some side stuff to do, like collect things that you can then trade for coin in the black market. You still got some bone charms that you could use to be able to kind of upgrade your powers or give you some slight advantage over the enemy. But most importantly, the one thing that I noticed that I think was mainly introduced in Dishonored 2 and they used here as well was the inclusion of some side quests. They're not really side quests, but they're like optional things that you can kind of do, some of which will give you some benefits to achieve your overall target, and then others to just really do on the side because, you know, if you're a completist, there's other things for you to do. Now, there's one last thing that I wanted to talk about before I wrap up, and I wanted to save it towards the end only because I don't know if it's even real. I don't even know if it's something that's actually built within the game or if it was just all up in my head because I was still recovering from my infection. But is it just me, or is Billie also slightly weaker than our previous protagonists? It's very easy for Billie to end up getting killed, which is probably why this game is so boisterous with its health elixirs. But there was something about Billie's way of taking damage that can be fixed with some bone charms, but I feel like I might need to warn you that Billie is a little bit much more fragile than previous protagonists that you played as, so you need to take care of how you strategize because it does lead to some frustrating moments. But when Dishonored works, it works beautifully because the gameplay is still there, the strategy is still there to be able to take down your enemies with force or through a variety of ways that are non-lethal. It can lead you to various objective benefits to be able to navigate you through your chapters easier. And at the same time, this story is one that's very well chosen, not only for the characters that are involved, but also for a very poignant way to kind of end the series, should this be the last time that we see the Dishonored series ever. And if all else fails when you're trying to be sneaky and you have to engage in some first-hand combat, just know that here we are about 3 games and some change in, and it still doesn't get old to cut somebody's head off. Actually, I didn't even cut somebody's head off. I cut somebody in half with just my knife in slow motion. And it was one of the more glorious moments that Dishonored Death of the Outsider was able to deliver to me. And it's one that I know that no other series is gonna be able to grant it to me. So if this is in fact the end for some time, I think that it's actually a rather fitting one for the franchise. So I'm gonna be giving Dishonored Death of the Outsider a very high 8 out of 10. Doesn't exceed the 9 level because again it did lead to some frustrating moments where I just thought that Billie's tenacity just didn't live up to other protagonists, where I just thought she was dying just a little too quickly. And I do think that some things could be refined here and there, especially because of how badly I was missing sleeping darts. There's no sleeping darts in this game, and for some reason I was craving them so badly. So many situations I was like, I wish I had some fucking sleeping darts. But that's something that you gotta commend to the makers of Dishonored for giving you a challenge that you hadn't seen before in the form of Billie Lurke. So if you have played Dishonored Death of the Outsider, let me know in the comments below what you guys thought of the game. Do you think that it was a really fine conclusion for the series, if this is in fact the end? Or do you think that it's a fitting end for what they call the Coldwind era? And do you think that there's going to be some potential for some brand new characters and a brand new story to be taking hold hold of the Dishonored series later on down the line. If you guys have any kind of feedback, any kind of scenarios for such a thing, then please post them in the comments below. However, if you have not played Dishonored Death of the Outsider and would like to purchase the game, you can always use the link in the description below. That would really help me out an awful lot. I would really appreciate it, guys. And speaking of appreciation, you know that I would show even much more appreciation if you guys would kindly show your love and support by hitting the like button and the share button. And if you're brand new to the channel, be sure to hit the subscribe button to stay tuned for future videos. Until next time, guys, I will see you all later. These actors that are brimming with talent are turned into pieces of wood. The script even tries to give them some witty banter, and yet, because of how monotone they are, it just doesn't work.
Tell me about your dream.
Emote, you left testicle, emote.